Are you questioning your reality? Do you feel gaslighted? It's not you, it's the media. I am Suchitra and I'll be joined by Bhakti and Madhuri Shastri to eviscerate the propaganda, set the record straight, and offer much needed moral clarity. Tune in each week. It's not you, it's the media, a podcast by the Polis Project.
Hi Madhuri, hi Suchitra. Welcome back, both of you, to It's Not You, It's the Media. I'm very excited because we have a funny pun, of course, that we have chosen for the title of the show: Make the Indian American Woman Brown Again. So, why are we going down this road? Why do we feel the need today, in the great year of the Lord 2025, to dissect the Indian American woman? And well, part of it is because we all are from India and we all live in the West, in the US, Europe, wherever, and have spent most of our life here. And so, how the Indian American woman behaves actually matters. And I think with our great diaspora proliferating everywhere and all these celebrities, all these TV shows representing Indian American women, it's been quite an exciting and quite excruciating last 5-6 years. I would say we've had the great Kamala Harris, who kind of popularized in some way this identity, as she was the vice president of the United States. And then there was a lot of debating around her Indianness, because she's only half Indian and half Jamaican. And along the way, I also ended up writing a long sort of essay about Mindy Kaling and the three shows that she's given, that she's brought into this world: The Mindy Project, Sex Lives of College Girls, and Never Have I Ever. All three very entertaining, interesting shows. But what they did was they synthesized in the imagination of the world, a sort of, in the English speaking world at least, who is the Indian American woman. And one of the arguments that I made is, why is this Indian woman a coconut, as they say, white on the inside, brown on the outside? And this is a very problematic thing. And so this is why we are saying, why is it that the identity of the Indian American woman is often co-opted into whiteness, is so adjacent to whiteness, to
Yeah.
Hindu-ness? And we are calling for her to become brown again, please. So this is where we are. What do you all think?
Well, Bhakti, about your essay, which I absolutely loved, and it was such a pleasure to admit. One of the things that I remember really standing out to me was how you had mentioned that her Indianness is something, first of all, that she doesn't even explore, and for many seasons on the Mindy show. And when she does explore it, it's only to renounce it and sort of say that she is in fact more American than Indian, which means she's more white than she is brown. And I think that that is the phenomenon that we are seeing today with a lot of Indian American women, right? So the trajectory is from being like completely like, no, I'm trying so hard to overcompensate and be the best, as much um like you as possible, to, I think there was a middle, when there was a time when the pendulum swung to mass fetishization of like brown women fetishizing their own aesthetic, to now, and their own identities, to now going all the way to like, oh, you don't even have to prove that you are brown. Like, that's in the past, right? And we see that with someone like Usha Vance, who is, a brilliant Yale educated lawyer, and married to JD Vance. And that has always confounded me, because there's so much, a lot of Indian American liberal women distance themselves from Usha Vance and threw their entire weight behind Kamala Harris, though there's very little separating the two of them, in my opinion. But I don't understand, and I would love for us to unpack how someone like Usha Vance, who grew up in this wildly identity politicsy country, ended up with someone who wrote hillbilly elegy and is Donald Trump's vice president. How? Like,
Caste.
cast.
Caste. I think a lot of these South Asian households, caste is a very important marker, especially if you belong to the upper caste, which majority of these migrations were. If you're Brahmin, the narrative that is often said over and over again is that we left India because Brahmins could no longer survive in India. There was no meritocracy. We came here. We are the meritorious class. We're better than everybody else. The value systems, and again, we don't know if this was the case, but as someone who has a front row seat to many of these conversations, it is true. The sense that we are indeed the chosen ones, that we are indeed here, the value systems that that kind of migration and Brahmanism brings really is this idea of being close to white supremacy. Just as caste is the organizing principle of the community that you left, here race is the organizing principle. Like this, the comment about the most educated black man can be pitted against a white man who thinks that all of his worries in this world is because of this person, right? The idea, of course, there is no class analysis in the United States. There's a lot of race analysis. There is no class analysis in the United States. There is no caste analysis. I know there was a book about Wilkerson's book on caste, but which again I think grossly misrepresents and understands what how caste and race interact. But I do think that there is a direct pipeline between Hindu supremacy, white supremacy, Zionism. The idea of supremacy, there is something that bonds all of this together. And that's exactly the same reason why you see, it's not just Usha Vance, you see Vivek Ramaswamy, same background, saying same things. There is a certain kind of narrative that they all bring. Our ancestors came to this country with nothing but $10, and with inflation, with every story, $10 becomes 50, then 50 becomes 75. Now I think the going rate is $150. So my ancestors came with $10 in their pocket, and look what they've accomplished. They've accomplished this because we are somehow different, and that kind of builds into the model minority myth. But really just that wanting to be close to power more than white supremacy. I think closeness to power. And when we saw Kamala Harris and all of these South Asian women for Kamala Harris, that really is, and a lot of them failing to critique Kamala Harris because they were like, no, 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 this is not the right time, or using the language of this is the time to speak out. Like, speak out for what?
I love like that the desire to dominate and the power, the adjacents to power is about a desire to dominate, right? The desire to be above a certain group of people,
100%.
and then you come into a country where whiteness reigns supreme, whiteness is power, and then you kind of try to be adjacent to that power, but then you're unable to let go of this fake notion of being marginalized and victimized and victim of racism. And I'm not saying that those things aren't true. Absolutely, brown people, Indian women, they are 100% victims of racism and things like that. But these women, when they are sitting there calling out against it and claiming what I see as the fakest possible form of resistance, it really is just absolutely cringeworthy
Yeah.
nonsense.
I mean, in Usha's case, I don't even know if she has any sort of track record speaking up about any of her intersecting, oppressions, like being a woman and being a woman of color. I've never heard her say anything about it. And I think obviously this idea of her wanting to dominate, and this idea that she came in here and her family came in and pulled themselves up by the bootstraps enables her to sleep at night when her husband and the president are, deporting thousands and thousands of Indians shackled back to India. And I want to pose a question to you, right? What would you prefer? Do you prefer someone like Usha who says absolutely nothing and does the dominating, and people are just sort of like, she's so passive, and you can project whatever you want onto her? Or would you prefer someone like Mindy and all of these other South Asians who are liberal and go up there with their faux activism while continuing to pursue a relentlessly pursue closeness to whiteness and power. What is your
This is so
preference?
unfair, and this is such a cruel binary, and I have never thought of this before. Madhuri, you're so bad. Um, oh my
Uh,
God. Yeah, I hate liberals. I'd rather take a full villain.
Agree. Yes, me
I'm with the
too.
full villain. But of course, if I have to choose, I reject them all and I choose, you and Suchitra and all the like the radical, cool, progressive brown women, like this is such a ridiculous devil in the deep sea,
I
whatever they
know.
call it,
I'm sorry.
catch 22 that we're stuck in. And the Mindy thing, of course, I took a real hammer to it in my essay, which now all our listeners they must read it. We'll add a link in here. But it's really super problematic because not only did she dilute what it meant to be Indian, she, through her 6 seasons of the Mindy Project, took us through multitudes of love interests, all of whom were white. And then at some point, she was criticized so much, Mindy, why are you only dating white men, white men, white men? And to the point that she finally decided, okay, she'll go on a date with some Indian man. And then that whole episode, there were 2 episodes where she's like, I'm coming to terms with my Indianness. And so she decided in those 2 episodes that she comes to terms with it. She goes on this very short journey of being Indian. She fiddles around a little bit, plays around with some upper caste mundan rituals for her baby boy, and then rejects it because this doesn't suit me. I'm American. I'm American. Her parents tell her, Mindy, you're American. What is this? What narrative journey has she taken us on? And why even, why this plea, this desperate begging, accept me, I'm American, I'm American, look at my accent, look at, I'm rejecting everything. It's absolutely bizarre.
Suchitra, what would you pick between the liberal and the Usha? Mindy versus Usha.
Look, all I know is that both of them perform this vegetarianism, no matter how sex positive Mindy is and how blonde eyed and blonde haired and blue eyed she might think she is. Mindy makes a reference to a vegetarianism when she's doing the thing for Chitti, Kamala Harris, when she does that dosa and she says, oh, a vegetarian, we're all vegetarian, like this blanket idea. And Usha Vance in her speech again when she's introducing Vance says, he's like the meat and potato kind of guy, but I'm vegetarian and he learned to cook for my mom. This idea that they're both vegetarian, this vegetarianism is something that they both seem to take um, deep pride in. The issue, I mean, I don't find them both problematic as individuals. I find them both problematic as public facing cultural figures who have an immense effect on a diasporic population that is at this point in time seems we have grown in size, we have fragmented, our sense of identity is derived out of how wealthy we are, how how we are represented, our need to be seen, and less about other things that makes a community what it is. And I this is something that I've noted all the time. If you go back and read Obama's memoir during his time as a president, one of the things he says that the Indian American community is the only community where people have given him money, and often all that they ever wanted was a photograph or signal closeness to power, and never asked anything for their own communities. And I'm just like, or we have become these people where it's the Hindu American Foundation, it is these like Hindu right wing Hindutva is culture, caste is culture, when we really are not interrogating what binds us together, what binds us together as our community, what is it that we stand for beyond the fact that we are as a community we are both uh, an incredibly wealthy community. Like we've made it big. At the same time, we also have the highest number of undocumented people. We often make vast majority of the diaspora makes up India's upper castes and upper classes. But what do we really stand as a community, if not filtered through the lenses of Ushas and Mindis and Kamalas and Padmas and Zarnagags of the world? This filtering is what they do, and I think that's what makes them dangerous.
Are there ones we like? I mean, what about Padma Lakshmi? Did she make Indian food great again? She's been there longer. I found her articulate and interesting in many ways. Um, yeah, I mean, not enough. She's not doing enough, but where do you stand on someone like her?
I am critical of Padma Lakshmi's many positions, but I'm also I'm always I find myself more sympathetic to her as a public figure. Also, she's been in public light when there was no, forget Indian Americans, there was no South Asian representation. Um, I've really liked the way she's held her own. Um the stories that came out of her Rushdie affair is just absolutely just. I mean, the fact that she did it.
I mean, I think too for Padma, what I loved as a Top Chef fan was just how unabashedly she would advocate for the chef contestants of color, you know? And I found that very sweet at the beginning, especially in the earlier seasons, and even as she started to really find her feet in the show. And I think that to me, I agree. I feel sympathetic towards her, and I understand her because, and I think the sympathy for me comes from the fact that she really embodies the clash, the outsider versus American clash so well. She was an outsider as a model. I mean, can you imagine? Like, there were no brown models from America when she was a model, and she had a scar and always tried to hide it or whatever it is. She as a chef, she was a judge on Top Chef, but she doesn't really have like professional training. Like, she didn't go to culinary school, and everybody else over there was so white and so schooled in American traditions or French traditions or whatever. You know how this is whole this like two cuisines, like, oh, French cuisine is like the be all and end all of any kind of culinary. And she did a lot to change the public narrative around that. She really brought to the fore other cooking techniques, and not just brown, but other international cooking techniques. And she seemed to have the tongue and the understanding and the eloquence to articulate and advocate for them. And it is important because food or food journalism or whatever it is, the food industry is one of the very few pipelines into mainstream acceptance. It's one place all immigrants can be. Like, I started off writing about food. My first piece ever published was about Top Chef. So it's like it's our inroad, right? It's our inroad. It's a way to say, look, this is what I bring to the table, and I'm same but different or whatever. So she did an amazing job there. um and to your point about Salman Rushdie, yes, she speaks up about endometriosis. She said some, revealed some really painful details about their marriage. And she's very honest as a person. But I feel like she, I don't know if this is right to say, but my feeling is always that she was perhaps very radical when she started out, or more radical than most. And as she has become more and more accepted into American society, less and less of an outsider, no matter where she is, um, I feel like she has become more and more pulled to the center, because she is like an ambassador for the ACLU, and she talks a lot about reproductive rights, but it's always this very easy, palatable position, to really overuse the food metaphor. I don't see her even on issues that she is outspoken about, really challenging anything, the status quo, the fact that women in Gaza are giving birth without medication, having C-sections without medication, Kolkata rape. I don't know. There are so many instances where I would have expected her to be more um, upfront, and she does use India a lot. She always goes to India, talks about her cousins in India, is hosting people from India, having a Diwali party. So it's not like she's like Mindy, where she's like, what is even India? Like, is there tigers there? She doesn't do that. But it's a very selective way of engaging with the country, which is what really makes me feel sad about Padma and questions a lot of um where she really stands.
Oh, that's very well articulated, actually. You've really drawn that arc of her career. I don't know if we want to talk about Zarna Garg, who's the comedian, because really she's Indian and she's bringing back something very different, something that we have lost, actually. And I don't think it's it's right because she wants to take us back to a time where we make fun of these sort of accents, where we have this Indian parents that only want their children to be doctors. And she's brought back that comedy which was starting to die down, and it's so cringeworthy and it doesn't make any sense. And it's this auntie jokes that she's getting a lot of, I don't know, acclaim or followers for, but it's really trying to redress something very, very old, like take an Indian stereotype and make a joke about it, and it's just not even funny.
No, for me, the problem is that comedy is supposed to be critical of power.
Yeah.
Comedy, great comedy, is always critical of power.
Mhm.
It's a capacity to navel gaze a little bit, but also like kind of say, okay, this is what I'm seeing. And for me, my concerns were, yes, it does set up a stereotypical Indian, the accent, the obsession with. Again, I really don't know how much of this is her and how much of this is set up. So I just don't know where the person ends and the comedy begins, or if there is. Sometimes I'm like, sometimes she says some deeply problematic things in this climate, especially calling Usha Vance this dynamic lady or something like that. I'm just like,
Really?
yeah, yeah, there was something. Then
Wow.
I was going to leave a comment, and then I was just like, no, I'm not engaging with this. I left India when I was 17. I left India in the early 2000s, and since that time, over the last 20 years, like there is the typical Indian stereotype doesn't exist, not the way it did,
No, it doesn't.
right?
Yeah, of
Even when
course it
you see
doesn't.
Never Have I Ever, the character Maitreyi Ramakrishnan's mother, played by she's this gorgeous woman, what's her name?
Purna Jagannathan.
Purna Jagannathan. I'm seeing Purna Jagannathan is probably closer to my age, like she's a mother in her 40s. And I'm like, I'm looking at her and I'm like, Indians of my generation don't think like this. Maybe the Indians of the previous generation did, but
Hmm.
Indians of my generation or South Asians of my generation don't think like this.
Person that Purna Jagannathan made me think of was Lily Singh, who I think has really sort of laid the groundwork to bring back those very trite, horrendous stereotypes about Indians. She obviously did it, more with Punjabis and Sikhs or whatever it is. But people who are trading on their identities in a way. So to your point, Suchitra, it doesn't actually matter where the person ends and where the comedy begins. Like she could be, um, whatever, like a saint for all I cared. But it is this public positioning that has such an effect on. To your point again, Bhakti, like the public imagination of what Indian Americans are like. And I think here is where I feel like there is this the one thing that ties all of us together, all of them together. I won't include us there. Is this idea, how all Indians are schooled to just like worship growth for growth's sake. Like when we were decolonized, it was like we would be a 20 superpower by 2020. We will be a superpower. Like doesn't matter what happens, we are going to be a superpower. Nonsense. It's this kind of thing of like I'm just going to make it. It doesn't matter what happens. I'm going to grow, I'm going to develop, and I'm going to become successful. Like that's it. And it feels in that way like this is extremely, I'm generalizing like crazy, but very desi.
I mean, I do think that those chauvinistic, strict, severe parents still exist who are forcing their kids to do one thing or the other, but it's sort of like harnessing that as the universal Indianness. This is where, which is weird because this is just such a big country and there's just so many ways to be there. And every generation is so different from the other, like just based on what TV they're watching, what music they're listening to. So it's hard to relate now to just that.
There is this idea of like what story do you want to tell people about your community, and maybe there is an inquiry that doesn't have to be quite so flat. Maybe we explore other cultural conditions or mental health, whatever conditions that lead to the manifestations of certain ideologies or whatever it is, right? But there is a way to do it which is also funny and gentle and doesn't flatten and allows people a full range of being that I don't see anyone doing. And there is one book I'll mention in this regard that I'll shout out, which is a book by Prachi Gupta, and it's called "They Called Us Exceptional," and it's a memoir of her very, very difficult relationship with for all intents and purposes comes off as a very stereotypical father, but she really delves into the sort of the mental health struggles and issues that he faced and the effect on her, and all that kind of stuff. And so I think, I'm not sure how well the book did, but my hope is that there will be space in the American imaginary for more nuanced, gentle, compassionate portrayals of real people, and not just like, why is my chai so cold, or whatever is Darna's brand is.
And I mean, this was a very horribly casteist and Hindu show, so it can't be forgiven, but it did introduce us to a very different and diverse set of Indian American women. Was Indian matchmaking with Auntie Seema. And
I
I
was
was
not
forced to
expecting
watch it because I had to be on some panel or something for it. And just because everyone was talking about it, like it had introduced a whole new thing, like old, it's like old horse, like in arranged marriage, but redressed into this like whole other Americana. And there we met a bunch of characters that came from a variety of kind of backgrounds: Hindu, upper caste, and then occasionally Sikh, but and very much part of the conservative ideal of heteronormative,
Sure.
marital, all that jazz. But they were all at least very different. They were not trying to fit this mold that Indian Americans always put in.
The thing that I found also interesting about Indian matchmaking is that it opened up a conversation about caste, in the mainstream.
Yes.
I was reading a lot about it, whereas I had not read anything about caste when Never Have I Ever came about, you know.
Yeah.
And this is, I don't know, maybe just because nobody really is addressing it except this girl, but they do use the markers, right? Like fair, tall,
All the
our
time.
background, our upbringing, like whatever it is, all the ways in which you talk about it euphemistically. And I was heartened at the number of mainstream places that were running very caste critical conversations
Mhm.
about Indian matchmaking.
I,
So I will give you
I
that.
I did worry that they didn't use the term wheatish enough on that show.
Oh.
Like that was one inauthentic thing there. They were not saying wheatish. This is like the favorite like arranged marriage ad. People are like, wheatish skin, and it's like, what color is
What does that
that?
even mean? Yeah. What is that? It's like almost people who have never seen wheat. And so therefore it's not people who are farmers, and therefore it is only upper caste people who can come
Yeah.
up with it.
Also, it's interesting with the Indian matchmaking is that all the couples in India were just so wealthy, like
I
unimaginably
know.
wealthy. But the people that they chose in the diaspora actually came from, you had people
Yes.
who came from across different class and not caste background, at least different class backgrounds. There was a teacher, there was somebody who was like a successful lawyer, there was like somebody who was like a dancer. The
Mhm.
diaspora representation was actually
Yeah.
surprisingly, while predominantly upper caste, was still in terms of class was diverse.
Mhm.
In India they were all so insanely rich and
Mhm.
so
Yeah,
wealthy.
insipid people from India, each of them. Like,
Horrible, because that's the only Indian that's interesting, right? It's like the fundamentally Bollywoodian Indian. It's like their life is only a Bollywood Karan Johar, like
And
Pooja
this is
Kathali
houses, man, these
universe.
large palatial houses. I'm like,
yeah.
I think they're called sets on a show like that.
Oh
no,
my
those are
God.
houses, Bhakti. Remember this guy who walks in, shows us a
Yes.
Y-
walk-in closet and
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Yes.
Not Atharva, some kind of name. Pradyumna. Pradyumna.
yeah, Pradyumna,
Something like this.
yeah.
Some kind of really intense
Good
name like
memory.
this.
So, what is our manifesto for Indian American women? How can we make Indian American women brown again? What are we leaving our listeners with?
Um, I'm gonna say that the next 4 years for all of us is going to be so brutal and devastating, that what we really need is community. Like we really need to center our communities. Like our communities are going to. I mean, there's already the amount of anti-Indian, anti-South Asian racism is on the rise, and that is going to have an effect. It's going to play out in very horrible ways. We saw how during COVID the attacks against Asian women went up. Of course, women from Southeast Asia were more visible, but the attacks against brown women in New York City also went up. I know
Hmm.
many cases where women were attacked and the NYPD even refused to file cases. And I literally had to be on the phone call on them, like, trying to get the NYPD to file a complaint of actual assaults. That's going to get bad. So, one thing I would say is no matter where you are, let's refocus our attention to our immediate communities. The second thing is do not collaborate with white supremacy. I regularly see these essays in so many of our mainstream media where there's always this one brown woman who is profiled, and we are told how she works across the aisle with white supremacists and how
Gross.
conservative Christians, and how this is the way. I'm like, no, do not collaborate with the very people who want to destroy our communities. Like, we know the agenda. Do not work across the aisle. You have no obligation to be neutral,
Absolutely.
objective. Work across the aisle with right wing conservative Christians whose idea of our humanity is almost nil. Don't do that.
And I'll say that there is a lot of liberal outrage in the United States about Trump. A lot of Indians who are feeling like, oh, my green card is in process, my this and that, and my immigration status feels precarious, and I hate Trump. And there's a lot of outrage, and that outrage leads to a sort of radical thinking. But let the 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 obsession with whiteness, to be near whiteness, to be adjacent to whiteness, to have a white gaze, be the subject of your own self scrutiny. It's like you can be outraged, you can say Trump is bad, but then ask yourself how much you have kind of tried your hard to be near this whiteness, or unpack your own whiteness, because this is what Indians tend not to do. They're like, no, we don't have racism, we have colorism. That's different. And but it's like, yeah, we have all the other isms. But I do think, like, the outraged liberal needs to ask themselves questions about their own desire to be near whiteness, and to unpack that, because what we are seeing now is unfettered white supremacy. That's really what it is.
Yeah.
Yep,
So,
yep, yep, yep.
The one thing I will say um, is when you are, as a brown person, telling your story or doing whatever it is, when you are making some observations or centering your identity in any way, I implore you to have a more holistic view of what it is, and to not flatten yourself for laughs, and not fetishize yourself for money, and don't air out your trauma for publications. Like, just hold yourself with respect, so that other people can hold you with respect, because the more that you as a brown woman, or that we as brown women flatten ourselves, the more we are allowing or giving permission to our oppressors to do the same to us. There are several people who are doing a better job now. I think even this therapist Sahaj Kohli, she goes by Brown Girl Therapist or something, I'm not sure, has a more compassionate inquiry into the immigrant situation, and why immigrants have a different sort of makeup, or what their experiences are like, and it's compassionate. So hold yourself with compassion, think of yourself as a person, think of your parents as a person, and do not flatten yourself out for the highest bidder. That's
here, here.